On a freezing winter morning, Rebecca Turner, a single mother and diner waitress, noticed a homeless man sitting outside the glass door, shivering and ignored by passing customers. Against policy, she slipped him a cup of coffee and a meal, her hands trembling as her manager watched. Hours later, she was called into the back office and fired for theft. Her kindness had just become a crime. The morning began like any other. The hiss of the coffee machine, the clatter of plates and the hum of country music on an old radio that never quite tuned right. Outside the frosted window of Miller's diner, the world was gray, cold, and indifferent. A light snow drifted down, dusting the sidewalks like forgotten promises. Rebecca Turner wiped her hands on her apron, her breath visible in the chilly air that seeped through the doorway every time a customer entered. She'd worked here for almost 6 years. Same uniform, same tables, same polite smile. But today, something was different. Out by the window, huddled against the brick wall, sat a man, maybe in his late 40s. His beard was matted, his coat thin, and his eyes fixed on the steam rising from the coffee cups inside. People passed him like he was invisible. One little girl tugged at her mother's coat and pointed. The mother gently turned her daughter's head away. Rebecca's heart sank. She knew that look, the kind of hunger that went beyond food. She turned to pour a fresh cup of coffee, her hand trembling slightly. "You okay, Rebecca?" asked Tina, the other waitress, chewing gum as she refilled napkin holders. "Yeah," Rebecca said softly, glancing out the window again. "Just cold." She waited until the counter cleared. Then quietly, she set a plate of scrambled eggs, toast, and bacon next to a steaming cup of coffee on a tray. The manager, Mr. Davis, was in the back taking inventory. She took a breath, slipped out the side door, and stepped into the cold. The man looked up, startled. "Here," she said gently, setting the tray on the ground beside him. "It's not much, but it's warm." For a moment, his eyes met hers, tired, grateful, disbelieving. "Ma'am," his voice cracked, rough from the cold. "Thank you." Rebecca forced a small smile. "Stay warm, okay?" When she stepped back inside, Mr. Davis was standing by the kitchen door, arms crossed, his jaw tight. "Did you just give away food?" he asked, voice low. Rebecca froze. The diner suddenly felt smaller, quieter. "He was freezing, sir." "I just save it," he snapped. "That's theft. You know company policy." Her stomach dropped. "It was just clock out, Rebecca. You're done here." The rest of the staff looked away as she removed her apron. The radio hummed softly in the background, the singer crooning about broken hearts and hard times. Rebecca's eyes welled, but she kept her head high. Outside, as she stepped into the biting wind, she saw the man still sitting there, eating slowly, carefully, like each bite was a prayer. For the first time all day, she smiled through the tears. Her kindness had cost her job. But somewhere deep down, she knew it was the only thing she couldn't afford to lose. Her humanity. Word traveled faster than truth in small towns like Greenville. By the next morning, Rebecca's firing wasn't just a rumor, it was a headline in whispers. At the grocery store, she caught the stares. At the bus stop, she heard the quiet voices behind her. "That's the one who stole from the diner," someone murmured once. "All that for a homeless guy." Rebecca didn't argue. She just lowered her eyes and walked faster, clutching the single grocery bag in her hands. Inside were ramen packets, milk, and a small jar of peanut butter, enough to stretch for a week if she skipped a few meals. The diner had been her lifeline, not just for the paycheck, but for the sense of belonging. Now, the silence of her tiny apartment pressed on her like a weight. The fridge hummed in the background, half empty, bills piled on the counter like quiet threats. One night, she turned on the local news just to hear another voice. The anchor smiled as if nothing bad ever happened in Greenville. Rebecca muted the TV halfway through and stared at her reflection in the dark screen. "You tried to help," she whispered to herself, though the words didn't make her feel any better. A knock came at the door. Her landlord, polite but firm. Rent was due and he couldn't wait another week. She promised she'd find something soon, even though she didn't believe it herself. By the third week, she stopped seeing Elijah outside the diner. Every day, she took the long way home, hoping she'd find him near the alley or the old bus bench. But he was gone, like the snow that had melted into dirty puddles. In her loneliness, Rebecca replayed the moment, the coffee, the tray, the way his eyes had glistened with gratitude. She wondered where he slept now, if he had eaten since that day, or if she'd made things worse for him by drawing attention. One afternoon, she passed Miller's diner again. Through the fogged windows, she saw Tina taking orders, Mr. Davis laughing with customers. Her heart twisted. The place looked the same, but she no longer belonged in that world. A mother and her teenage son sat by the door, the same spot where Elijah had once shivered. The boy dropped a few fries onto the ground outside, and Rebecca's breath caught when a stray dog appeared, sniffing hungrily. She knelt down, offering the rest of her sandwich to the dog with a soft smile. It wasn't Elijah, but in that small act, she felt a flicker of peace. The kind that came from doing good when no one was watching. It started with a shaky phone video posted to a small Facebook page. Random Acts of Kindness, Greenville. A woman waiting for her to go order at Miller's Diner had filmed it weeks earlier, never thinking it would matter. But one night, when she scrolled through her camera roll, something made her stop. The video showed Rebecca, wearing her faded blue uniform, leaning down with a paper cup in her hands. Behind her, the glass door reflected a world too busy to care. People walking by, eyes averted. Then Elijah, the homeless man everyone ignored, looked up. His hands shook as he accepted the food, and his lips moved in a soft, "Thank you." In the background, the camera caught the moment Mr. Davis stormed out of the kitchen. The tension was silent but visible. His finger pointing, Rebecca's stunned expression, her lips trembling as he spoke words the microphone didn't catch. Then, the door swung shut. That single clip, less than 30 seconds long, lit up the internet. By morning, it had been shared thousands of times. By nightfall, hundreds of thousands. Comments poured in from every corner of the country. "This woman deserves a medal." "Kindness shouldn't cost your job." "Who's the diner manager?" "Fire him!" Then came the second video. It was grainier, taken days later by a different passerby. Elijah was back at the diner, not begging, not eating, but sweeping trash from the sidewalk with a worn-out broom. His hands were blistered, his movements slow but deliberate. When he finished, he took a folded piece of paper from his pocket, pressed it against the door, and taped it there. The camera zoomed in. The note read, "She treated me like a person." The words hit like thunder. News outlets picked it up. Local reporters drove down to Greenville. Rebecca's name, once whispered in shame, became a symbol of decency in a world that had forgotten it. Meanwhile, Rebecca had no idea. She didn't have Wi-Fi. She didn't even have her phone service anymore. She was sitting at her kitchen table, staring at an eviction notice, when there was a knock on the door. It was her neighbor, Jordan, a college kid from down the hall. He held out his phone, screen glowing. "Miss Rebecca, you need to see this." She watched the video in silence, hand covering her mouth as tears filled her eyes. The sound of the crowd cheering online, invisible but powerful, echoed in her chest. For the first time in weeks, she felt seen. Not by the world, but by someone who understood the cost of compassion. The quiet apartment that had once echoed with loneliness was now filled with the hum of news crews and flashing cameras. Reporters crowded the small walkway outside Rebecca's door, their voices overlapping like waves. "Rebecca, how does it feel to be America's Good Samaritan? Did you ever think this moment would come?" She stood by the doorway, still wearing the same plain gray sweater she'd worn the day she was fired. Her fingers gripped the fabric as she stared out at the chaos. It all felt surreal, like someone else's life. Across town, Miller's Diner had turned into a war zone of opinion. Protesters held signs reading "Rehire Rebecca" and "Kindness isn't a crime." The owner, Mr. Davis, eventually stepped in front of the cameras with trembling hands and a shaky voice, admitting he'd been too harsh and deeply regretted his actions. But Rebecca watched that broadcast with a strange stillness. Forgiveness wasn't something you could perform on live TV. When she finally agreed to one interview, the host asked gently, "What made you do it, Rebecca?" She paused for a long moment before answering. "Because he was cold," she said quietly, "and no one else cared." That single sentence spread everywhere, from talk shows to Twitter feeds. For the first time in her life, Rebecca's voice mattered. But fame didn't feel like justice. It felt heavy. The next morning, she walked to the diner. The crowd outside parted as she passed, phones held high to record the moment. The air smelled of coffee and cheap excitement. Mr. Davis rushed to greet her at the door, his rehearsed apology spilling from his lips. "I made a mistake, Rebecca. The world saw it. I saw it. Please, I want you to come back." She smiled faintly, eyes filled with something softer than anger, but deeper than forgiveness. "I think I'm done serving coffee for a while." As she turned to leave, the crowd fell silent. That's when she saw him, Elijah. He stood across the street, clean-shaven, wearing a donated flannel and jeans that actually fit. In his hands, he held a small paper cup, the same brand she used to pour every morning. Their eyes met through the noise and chaos, and in that single look, everything else disappeared. He nodded once, slow, grateful. She nodded back, tears stinging her eyes. No words, no cameras, just two people connected by something pure and unspoken. As Rebecca walked away from the diner, the morning sun broke through the clouds, painting the cracked pavement in gold. She smiled to herself, realizing that the world might finally be paying attention, but not because of fame, or anger or outrage. It was because kindness, once forgotten, had found its way back into the light.